You think that writing a tweet or posting a graphic and tagging your senators just goes off into the ether and really makes no impact, but that's not true. We have gotten feedback from Senate offices who've said, are y'all the ones who are tweeting and tagging us thousands of times every week, every month, blah, 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 because they have to log it. And as Carson says, every time you call, they have to take down what you're calling and demanding, what you're asking for.
Hi there, I'm Megan Jensen, the Director of Programs for the American Theater Wing, and I want to welcome everyone to this evening's Masterclass, Learn to be an Effective Arts Advocate, with our friends and colleagues from the Be an Arts Hero organization. The American Theater Wing's Masterclass series was established as a way to continue our critical professional development work during the pandemic. In addition to masterclass sessions on craft, we also host special conversations like tonight's masterclass that address life in the arts field and other skills necessary to survive and thrive as a theater professional. The Wing is a nonprofit organization providing lifeline support to artists and theater makers, such as unrestricted grants, which can help pay their rent, college tuition for students pursuing a career in the theater, and access to free resources like this masterclass for students and theater professionals worldwide. It is our hope tonight that we amplify and empower each of you as arts workers to learn the resources and facts available to you so you can add arts advocacy into your toolbox of essential skills as an arts and cultural worker. Our industry is counting on our community to come together to use our voices, to ensure that the arts can continue. And the Wing is so proud to partner with the Be an Arts Hero organization tonight to share the facts and resources so we all can own our power as arts workers. So now it is my ultimate pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, and I welcome her to join me on screen, our American Theater Wing President and CEO, Heather Hitchens. And while Heather's coming on screen, I want to take a moment to share how lucky we are to have our leader and CEO moderate this insightful discussion, as Heather has not only spent the past decade at the Wing, but as a nationally recognized arts leader with nearly 30 years of performing arts administration, policy, and program development experience. Prior to being at the Wing, she was appointed by the governor of the state of New York to serve as the executive director of the New York State Council on the Arts. Prior to her leadership at NYSCA, she was the president of the renowned national service organization Meet the Composer for nearly a decade. And right now, she is on faculty of Baruch College's Master's in Arts Administration program, where she's teaching a course on cultural policy. We couldn't be more honored, Heather, to have you moderate tonight's conversation, and it's now my pleasure to turn the masterclass over to you.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. That bio just says I've been around for a long time. I've been advocating for the arts for a long time, and this is an amazing moment of inflection and opportunity. It's a challenging moment, but it's a moment where I think the arts can really own our power. As a sector, we've been through a lot over the years, with the cultural wars, but there's no other sector other than the arts that improves every other sector it interacts with. It improves education, it improves crime, it improves economics. And when I say improves crime, I mean when we have cultural institutions and neighborhoods, crime goes down. It improves health. There was an article in the New York Times about a year ago about how participation in the arts helps you live longer, improves your overall health. So tonight, whether you are an arts worker on the stage or you're an arts worker off the stage, or you're a board member or supporter, we're going to give you some tools and some facts and figures so that we can collectively own our power and not just get a bailout, but come back with sustainable support for the arts as a central part of our economy and our life. Really excited to have the Be an Arts Hero folks join us tonight, and I'm going to ask them to come on camera, and I'm going to introduce each one of them to you briefly. Brooke Chiemi Ishibashi is a fourth-generation Japanese-American actor and singer, core member of Fair Wage on Stage, and National Council for Actors Equity Association. She originated and developed the role of Neri in Cambodian rock band and is passionate about work that explores anti-racism, social justice, and transgenerational trauma. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you for having us, everyone.
Next up is Carson Elrod. He is a professional actor, teacher, coach, director, and labor activist living in Brooklyn, New York. He's had the unique experience of working across the performing arts and cultural sector in film, television, on Broadway, off Broadway, with the Metropolitan Opera, the Boston Symphony, in cabaret, and improvisational situations such as tonight, and with the Upright Citizens Brigade. So welcome, Carson.
Thank you.
And also with us tonight, Jenny Grace Mackholm. She is a Brooklyn-based writer, actor, director, and producer committed to creating and participating in intersectional feminist work. Notable written works include Vanquish, which was a 2019 Eugene O'Neill finalist, a 2020 21st Century Voices New Play finalist, a 2020 Jane Chambers Excellence in Feminist Playwriting Award finalist, and also the play Relent, which was a New York Innovative Theater nominated musical. Welcome, Jenny. And last but not least, we have Matthew Lee Earlbach. He is a writer, actor, labor activist whose work has been supported by the NEA, the Lawrence Hatcher Foundation, the Puffin Foundations, Humanitas. He has written shows for Netflix, Showtime, WWE, MTV, Nickelodeon, and his plays have been seen at theaters throughout the country. Welcome, friends. So we get together all the time, this group, and we have a little methodology that we're going to share with the world, and that is because we all get so passionate. If we want to speak and cut in, because we're going to have a very lively conversation here, we put our finger up that we want to be called on. But let's get started and tell everybody watching here, what is Be an Arts Hero and why did you start it?
I'll start off with the basic, thesis statement. So we started, Be an Arts Hero started as a nonpartisan national grassroots campaign. And our effort was to mobilize the entire arts and culture sector. So that's how this began about 5.5, almost 6 months ago at the end of June. We got together and we realized there needed to be an effort to create a collective or a unified front, because our arts and culture sector is so vast, but we're all siloed off into our own individual lanes, right? So we thought, hey, this could be our Arts Adventures Assemble moment, and why don't we take that on and gather together all of our amazing advocates and pre-existing coalitions and unions and affiliations and rank and file members and celebrities to get everyone shoulder to shoulder to all be singing the same song. So that was the impetus behind why we started. And on a very personal note, it was because all 4 of us here, along with our amazing team, we realized that we had to more or less become the heroes that we were waiting for, and we are advocating for ourselves as much as we are the other 5.1 million arts workers in our sector, because we all are losing our health insurance or losing our unemployment benefits, have lost jobs and contracts. So it's a very personal, desperate need for all of us. Does anyone else want to piggyback on?
One of the things that Brooke just touched on is the idea that we who are leading this campaign, we who are volunteering for this campaign, we make up some of the 2.7 million completely and totally unemployed arts workers that are in the United States right now. And in the early phases of the pandemic, we watched the kind of reality, the fabric of our reality start to kind of evaporate. So I had a friend of mine who was a clown with the Cirque du Soleil. And one day they were performing in Houston, and then they were on a pause, and the pause turned into a furlough, and the furlough turned into the Cirque du Soleil went bankrupt. And it was like, oh, I had friends whose agencies called them and said, hey, we're going to have to drop you as a client, not because we don't love you, not because we don't want to represent you, but without artist commissions, we're done. We're folding. We're over. So, and then I saw like the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater within a month of the closings in March, it disappears. In the Improv Olympic in Chicago, closes. The Second City, up for sale. So these kind of tentpole institutions of our cultural identity and our lives, and just like our day-to-day understanding of our place in the world and our relationship to our industry started to unravel. And as we got closer to June, the CARES Act funding was running out, both for our employers, but for us. You know, the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, that extra $600 that was a lifeline for the 2.7 million arts workers that was keeping them in their homes with the lights on, fed, disappeared. And we were looking around and we were like, well, surely someone is going to step forward on behalf of the artists. Someone is going to, like light the fire, and Congress is going to do something, and we'll all be saved by July 1st. And then we realized, as we got closer and closer to that cliff, we were like, are we the people that should be doing that? And so our hero, or at least my hero, my angel siren person that I always look to, is Mavis Staples. And she has a song called Action. And the very first lyric of that song is, who's going to do it if I don't do it? And so that's kind of like a real fiery impetus for where we began, is who was going to do it if we didn't. And so we jumped in. We jumped into the fray.
And thank goodness you did. You mentioned something that we've talked a lot about, which is the silos that exist. And that's why artists were left out, because and we'll get to that later about how our cultural policy created a cultural community that isn't really support artists except through what is supposed to be trickle down economics, but there's no trickle, and it's not flowing down. But the silos really hurt us, because when we're trying to get a message across, and it's like the big institutions, they have their priorities and their lobbyists, and the small institutions do the best they can to, whatever. And then the artists, what you identified, were left out of all of it. And so it's like, to me, one of the things that I hope, and we talk about this a lot, that can come through this is a unification of the entire industry, that we're all interdependent. And, and that, the silos, we love our wonderful thought diversity and all that too, but there are some things that are fundamental. There are some things that we can agree on, and then we can be better advocates if we're all kind of rowing in the same direction. And so I'm thrilled that you have stepped into the fray, and thrilled to be working side by side with you. So let's get into, this is a masterclass. And so, a lot of people get scared of the word advocacy and what do I do? But it starts first with having the facts, and the facts about the arts and what they do are pretty extraordinary. So let's get into this and arm our folks here with the facts.
Well, let me jump into the facts, and also dovetail to what you just said about this unifying principle for opera, theater, live performance, concerts, cultural spaces, dance workers, museums, etc. It's labor. We are laborers, and the intellectual and creative and physical labor of our industries create this $877 billion that is added to our GDP. That's 4.5% of our GDP. That is more than agriculture and mining put together. Nothing against agriculture and mining, they're essential. We're $265 billion more than transportation. So when you look at our added value, it is incumbent upon all arts and culture workers to understand the value that we bring. We are big business because we're local business, and we drive communities. So whether you're in Raleigh or Jackson or Anchorage, Alaska, and of course, LA, San Diego, Chicago, New York, but when you're talking about these smaller cities and towns across the nation, a thought experiment that I like to illustrate is that these institutions are stars. They highly interdependent local commercial ecosystem that in its orbit is hospitality, retail, restaurants, transportation, tourism. And every time one of these stars implodes, Improv Olympics, Cirque du Soleil, everything in that orbit goes down with it. Now, if you multiply that one institution collapsing across the state, you have a galactic economic collapse happening, everything going down with it. Now, multiply that across a nation, you have a universal economic catastrophe. So what Be an Arts Hero is attempting to do is arm every arts and culture worker and legislator and citizen with the value that we generate, of course, creatively and emotionally and spiritually and culturally, but economically, because once we know what we're worth, what our value is, and that we're a jobs multiplier. 4.16% is our growth rate, nearly double that of the US GDP at 2.2%. We're a really good bet.
Knowing what we're worth, You know, I think there's been a lasting impact of the culture wars when we thought we were going to lose the NAA, and we were like, oh my God, we didn't lose the NAA. Okay, everybody keep their heads down, and then we're going to just, you know, fight for the small pie. But the truth is, we're much bigger than that, and we don't have to fight for the crumbs. You know, we can make bigger pies, and we can, you know, but it is about knowing the facts and owning our power. It's almost like a self-esteem campaign for the industry to begin with, so that we can own our power.
You know, one of the things that we like to talk about, in addition to our, you know, the wonderful metaphor of our arts and culture being a star, is we like to think about or talk about how our sector is a cornerstone sector. It's a sector on which other sectors implicitly rely on. So when you think about it in terms of just an arts night out, to see Beyonce in concert, or to see Slave Play or Hamilton on Broadway, to listen to Dolly Parton, or to, I don't know, go to the Metropolitan Opera, let's say, you know, any number one, a gallery opening, right? An average arts night out, it creates revenue of approximately $30 and some odd cents per event ticket. So that's not including the ticket. So what that is let's say you have to hire a babysitter, right? That's for the babysitter. And then you have to pay for transportation. That's gas, that's a taxi, that's public transportation, right? Or a bicycle, let's say, if you really want to cut down on costs. And then there's dinner beforehand, merchandise during, and drinks afterwards. And then there's transportation back. So when we talk about how we are a cornerstone portion of our sector, or our cornerstone sector on which other sectors rely, this is what we're talking about. 68% of tourism is cultural. And not only is 68% of tourism cultural, but cultural tourists spend almost 2 times more than other tourists. So we are beyond being a jobs multiplier, and beyond being a generous revenue stream all on our own, what we do to hospitality, what we do to transportation, what we do to hotels, restaurants, bars, is not incidental. They in fact rely on our business to thrive as their business model. Brooke?
If I can piggyback off of that, and I think Matthew touched upon this a little bit, our tagline now, the sexy pitch we leave all of our Senate and House Rep meetings with, is that there can be no full American economic recovery without a robust arts and culture recovery, because our fates are so intrinsically tied together. So if they let us implode, we take down transportation, tourism, hospitality, et cetera, because they rely on us in order to thrive. And for a very granular example, I worked at Oregon Shakespeare Festival last year. It isn't just the employees of OSF that are affected by their inability to do their work as usual now. It's the city of Ashland, but not only is it the city of Ashland, it's the entirety of Southern Oregon, because tourism is so central to that environment thriving. So as Matthew said earlier, we are looking at ecosystems. And when we break it down, yes, we have a larger macro national impact, but in order to get through to certain senators, we have to break it down by local jobs and local economies, because it isn't just affecting the theater workers, it's affecting the restaurant workers, the people who run the hotels, the gas stations, the grocery stores, etc. So that's something that we always try to hone in on, that so people understand the very, very direct impact it has. Cars?
And Heather, I just wanted to pivot back to what you were talking about kind of a self-esteem campaign for the sector, which is that if you look at what happened with the CARES Act, right, there was a bipartisan understanding that the United States economy was cratering and that a floor needed to be put under various sectors. And so, yes, there was PPP that went into the arts and culture. Yes, there was some funding that was given to the NEA, NEHCPP, IMLS, but nothing on par with what the sector needs. And so Richard Florida and Michael Seaman wrote this incredible study called Lost Art, COVID-19's Devastating Impact on the Creative Economy. So definitely find that. It's the Brookings Institution. Go find it. It's an amazing stuff. But what it does is it shows, one, it kind of imagines the economy in an even greater, they put the total economic input and output of the creative economy at like 1.7 trillion. And then they go through state by state talking about the negative impact, what's being lost, how many tens of thousands of jobs, how many billions of dollars in losses in each and every state. And this is what I want to like pivot back to what you were talking about, Heather, is the idea that like when we see that transportation is in trouble, we go, okay, they need relief. When we see that agriculture is in trouble, we go, oh, they need relief. The problem is there is something off about the conversation about the creative economy where there isn't an understanding that it's 4.5% of the GDP, and that it's $877 billion, that it's a bigger socioeconomic contributor than all of these other sectors, which everybody on a totally bipartisan front agrees need help. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to go into these meetings and say, hey, listen, I guess this is time for me to tell my favorite story, which is we reached out to Lisa Murkowski's office and we said, we would really like to have a meeting. And her arts portfolio person said, well, it's not a big deal up here, knock on another door. And we said, okay, well, it's this many billions of dollars to GDP. It's this many tens of thousands of Alaskan jobs. And these are institutions that we've been talking to that are distressed. Ann McInerney, her head of economic policy, got back to us and said, I would like to talk to you. And so we met with her, and after a robust and really fruitful conversation that was really, really great, at the end, she said, oh, well, your argument is pretty unimpeachable. You're just saying that there's 4.5% of GDP that's kind of being left out of the relief conversation, and you really want to be a bigger part of the relief conversation. And we said, yes. And so to pivot back around, I know that we've all had a lot to say on this issue, Heather, but like this idea of us finding our confidence again is a big part of it. And trying to go with a front-footed model where we go straight through the front door and we say, hi, we're here, we're big business. And as you said in your introduction, there's no society that we don't improve.
Better, yeah.
So let's talk about it, Jenny.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what you're saying, Carson, one of the things we realized is that we don't have a data problem. We have a marketing problem. We are not branded correctly. I think that the argument has always been the tug on your heartstrings, Mr. Rogers argument, which is right. It's good for society. It's good for all of us. It's this. And what we've learned is that we can make the argument, the economic argument, just as well. And that's one that legislators listen to. So we realized that if we were going to, part of our advocacy work couldn't just be going directly to legislators, because there was already an inherent bias there. It had to work in tandem with a sort of education of not just arts workers, or not just the public, but arts workers themselves. Arts workers themselves weren't educated right. in their value. They weren't empowered to understand exactly, we have internalized the idea that we are starving artists. We've internalized that concept, that we have to be grateful for the scrap, for any opportunity we get. And because of that dynamic, that power dynamic about what it means to hustle and survive as an arts worker, it has informed how we move around the world when we're asking for something that in any other sector would be a no-brainer, right? So we realized that we had to basically coordinate our efforts so that we were working both politically, but also we were acting socially to educate, inform, and empower arts workers and the general public so that they understand the facts and figures of our industry, so that they can come in, so that they can be empowered to then call their representatives. And they are armed with facts and figures that back up their argument. The best thing about what we're doing is that we have all of it on our side. Not only are we great for society in every meaningful level, not only are we wildly popular, charismatic, and attractive, and we do the work that everybody wishes they could do, right? Like arts is like, everybody loves to watch Netflix or listen to music. I mean, this is what culture is in everything, right? So we, not only that, but we're enormously profitable. So there's always been this idea of a starving artist, and yet the arts and culture sector has always been profitable. So it's about flipping the script.
Well,
the phrase that Carson loves to say.
Yes, flipping the script and getting out of a poverty mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the economic development argument is something that the arts community has wrestled with, because in a way they say, oh, well, now we're not talking about art for art's sake. No. I challenge that, because it's the art for its art's sake that creates the economic development all by itself. It creates arts and economic development. It's not just Broadway in the theater. Off-Broadway creates economic development. The regional theater creates economic development. And so you're not selling out by owning your power. This is so important to understand, because it has held us back. I think in terms of our advocacy, it's been part of our branding problem, as you said. Before we go on, I do want to talk about the 68% thing. I want to make sure that lands. 60% of all tourism is driven by arts and culture. Okay, 68%. And what is going to bring the economy back is when tourism comes back. That is the majority. That is the majority of tourism. That's right.
Well, Heather, one of the things that we say, Brooke was saying, as we're leaving these meetings, right, is we say, okay, obviously the human and physical infrastructure of the arts economy needs saving. It needs relief right now. But COVID-19 has completely and totally devastated the United States economy. And we're in trouble, and the next 5 months are going to be even more terrible, and we're going to be in even more trouble. So if you look at our growth rate, which is 4.16%, as Matthew said, it's nearly double the rate of the rest of the economy, then an intrepid lawmaker might go, okay, how are we going to take a defibrillator to the chest of the American economy and get us back up and running as fast as we can? Well, one of the things we say as we're leaving is investment, support, expansion of the creative economy, and specifically arts and culture. Richard Florida, in his book, The Rise of the Creative Class, he demonstrated, he proved it with statistics, data, and analysis. If you want to know where an economic hotspot is going to be, look for where the artists are. And Jenny Gersten, in her amazing Bloomberg piece, offered, the way to a recovery on the other side of COVID-19 is through arts and culture. And she specifically used Mass MoCA as an example in North Adams, Massachusetts. So out there in the Berkshires, they had a dead factory in a small little sleepy town. Now, they turned that factory into one of the world's most important modern art museums. And because Mass MoCA exists, now the Porches Bed and Breakfast exists. There's all these restaurants and cute little bars and coffee shops. And North Adams is now a global destination. People fly from all over the world because they want to see James Turrell's new light structure. You know what I mean? So if we think about that in terms of how to recover the American economy on the other side of COVID-19, how do we do that defibrillator? How do we get the country back up and running? Arts and culture are as Matthew said, we're a safe bet.
Absolutely. So with these facts and figures that are powerful, and they're on Be an Arts Hero's website, they'll be on our website. Don't be without them again. And they're a great cocktail conversation and important advocacy work. And, when I was at NISCA, when the constituents used to advocate, one of the arguments I used to hear that drove me crazy is, if you don't fund us, we're going to go out of business. And I go, no, if you don't get funding, other things are going to go out of business. That's the argument, is just understanding, how embedded we are. So armed with these statistics, how do we mobilize ourselves? How do we mobilize others? And specifically, what are some specifics we can do? So we've had a little thought leadership here, and now let's go to some do leadership.
Yeah, this is all, there's kind of three things, right? Educate, educate, and organize. And by being armed with this information and deploying it and converting everyone and spreading, like being Johnny Appleseeds of activism and spreading the information everywhere, it's going to change our relationship to our government, and it's going to reposition us as a legislative priority, because the friction of knowing the value and not seeing the legislative action is going to passionately frustrate people to the point of action. So on beanartshero.com, we have tons of resources, phone scripts, pre-populated tweets, pre-written letters that you can revise, the social media handles and contact information of all our senators. And we'll be revising that, of course, in the new administration. But the thing that every legislator, and we've met with, over 60 Senate offices and dozens of House offices at this point, everyone wants to hear from their local constituents. So if you're in Mississippi and Senator Hyde-Smith and Senator Wicker represent the state, they need to know that arts are a priority, and that how they're a priority at the local level and at the state level, how they drive local economies. It's talking to boards of these institutions. It's talking to everyone that is involved in this ecosystem. It's talking to the restaurant coalitions and the chambers of commerce. And again, it's making it an economic priority. And when you go into GOP or Democratic offices, like Carson said about this, the Senator Murkowski story, there's no one that can argue with the economic power when you're bringing them these numbers. So arm yourself with the information and bring it to your legislators at the federal, state, and municipal level, and create coalitions where they don't already exist. Link up with existing state arts agencies who have been doing this work for decades. And the thing that I would say is, be a squeaky wheel. Leverage the platforms, social media wise or press, in your communities to make sure that everyone knows about this ecosystem, that everyone knows what the statistics and the numbers are. We can talk about, yes, this is democratic power. We are the very expression of this nation. I'm from Chicago. I'm very proud that I'm from a city that is such an arts and culture forward city: blues, jazz, hip hop, sketch comedy, theater, museums. I grew up with the vocabulary of that in my city. It is an economic driver. Without it, Chicago is gutted. Although we have some good parks and bridges. But I would imagine for any community, especially where there are indigenous cultural institutions and BIPOC institutions that give voice to the voiceless, that go to where the silence is, that make the invisible visible, we need them, because that is our heritage, that is our culture. And when we are in defense of our local storytellers and our local institutions, again, that argument is unimpeachable, not only for this economic argument, but for we are the reputation of these places. So I would say local, 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 find out who represents you, get it to the press. Cars?
That was amazing, and I loved every single second of that. That's one of the reasons that this continues, is that the four of us continue to inspire each other, and that's very heartening. I just want to say something about the idea that I certainly know that sometimes I can go to bed feeling helpless. I can go to bed feeling like calling my senator doesn't matter. I can go to bed feeling like the decisions that are going to get made whether or not I'm yelling about them or not. I mean, it can be very, very dispiriting. But here's the thing. The National Independent Venue Association did not exist 8 months ago. It didn't exist. Right now, the National Independent Venue Association has created a piece of legislation called Save Our Stages that is part of the compromise bill that is being debated in the Senate. These people who are the ones in distress, the ones watching their businesses close and fall and disappear forever, got together. They harnessed the power of the celebrities the musicians, the arts workers that are in those rock and roll venues. They signed petitions, they put on rock concerts and fundraisers, and they wrote a piece of legislation called Save Our Stages that is currently being debated by Congress. And there's a good chance by this time next week, Save Our Stages will be part of a law. That is incredible. That is incredible. And it shows what you can do, because you can do it in your community. Anybody, like you can get together, you can get on the phone, you can harness the power of your own voice, of your own platform, of your own institution, of your own community, and you can come together and, as Matthew said, you can start to make noise, and it can really matter. Like right now, we have been doing this. Neva came online about 2.5, 3 months before us. So, you know, we're the newer kid on the block, but we're following a very similar trajectory. We are meeting with these legislative partners and we're building our own piece of legislation. So it's possible. You can do it. And in the meantime, pick up the phone, call your senators, use the resources that are available to you. Brooke?
Yeah, I feel as though so we entered the fray not being experts. We entered the fray being organizers and artists, activist organizers, but we're not trained lobbyists. We didn't go to school for this. And so I think for anyone who's on this call or who watches this after the fact, you know, knowing that we have an individual and collective responsibility to do something, to be the change you want to see, right? To create the change that you want to see. But knowing that you don't need to have a PhD in this stuff. Like, right. Look at us. We're lobbying with the best of them, and we're literally learning as we go. Our learning curve is so steep, and we've been very, very, very lucky to find partners like American Theater Wing, et cetera, who are graciously teaching us and holding our hands along the way. Americans for the Arts and Theater Communications Group, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an idea that we have created an ideology or a labor movement around the idea that we are all arts workers, because we wanted to change the narrative and we wanted to change the conversation so people could understand that I, as Brooke, as an individual citizen, have the power to affect the kind of change I want to see. You know, you think that writing a tweet or posting a graphic and tagging your senators just goes off into the ether and really makes no impact, but that's not true. We have gotten feedback from Senate offices who have said, are y'all the ones who are tweeting and tagging us thousands of times every week, every month, blah, 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 because they have to log it. And as Carson says, every time you call, they have to take down what you're calling and demanding, what you're asking for. So if there's anything that folks take away from this conversation, we want to impart that you can make the change every single day. And it's as easy as taking 1 minute to tweet a tweet. And we have all the tools. You know, Jenny has just so geniusly created an entire toolkit that we're going to provide for everyone who's on this call, to specifically call attention to the action that we're asking people to take this week, specifically for this compromise, this bipartisan compromise relief bill. But we make it so easy. We just put it all on our website, and all of the tools are there, and all of the contact info is there, and the pre-written tweets are there, the pre-filled automated email templates there. So it's very simple, and it's just knowing that you have power as a citizen to demand that change.
It's simple, and you can affect change, and everybody thinks they have to write a personal tweet, and that's helpful if you can do it, but it's a numbers game too. It's how many times were they hit up for this. And so, you know, important for everybody to just remind you that this legislation is coming up. You can still try and affect change. You can contact your legislators. Please do that. Jenny, you have to say, and then I want to talk about individual artists for a minute.
I just want to talk a little bit like nuts and bolts. First of all, what I love about what Brooke says, and this is maybe a little of an obscure reference, but I'm a big fan of this podcast called My Favorite Murder. And one of the Georgia Hardstark, I think her grandmother gave her advice a long time ago that was like, there are bigger dummies than you doing what you want to do. And it's like, and I think about that sometimes every time I'm intimidated, like, why am I in this room? I think specifically, very often women get imposter syndrome, when they're in certain rooms. And I tell myself that all the time. They're bigger dummies than you. You know, like every time I think this is much bigger than I thought I was going, you know, like this, I've been thrust into, you know, we've had to meet the moment in a lot of ways. No one in this Zoom room expected that this is where we would be 6+ months ago when we started this in our living rooms. But here we are, and we're so grateful. But I just want to demystify it for anybody watching who thinks that we're some kind of extraordinary, you know, like that we have the finances to do all of this, you know, independently. None of us are independently wealthy. All of us are struggling. B, that we're incredibly well connected, and that's how we're just rank and file arts workers doing our, you know, like advocating for our sector. We represent we are trying our hardest to represent 5.1 million arts workers. But within that, I just want to take away any I want to demystify the process a little bit. It just takes a little bit of I like to say a learner's mindset, that you start out. We're a big fan of Leroy Jenkinsing. If you're not familiar with the reference, it's a great one to look up later. But you know, we go forward with what we believe to be the right step, but we also are fairly nimble about it. And we learn from people who have been doing this for far longer than we are, than we have been. And we adjust and learn as we go. So just some really hard, just easy things to do if you want to advocate. We make it easy if you want to advocate using our toolkit. You can go to our website and get involved. You can also go to our Instagram, and you can click on our bio, and it has a drop-down menu of like pre-populated tweets. You don't even have to draft it yourself. You just press a button. A pre-populated email. You don't have to write it yourself. You just have to press send. We have a list of your all of your senators' handles, phone numbers, and email addresses also in that database. And we have a toolkit full of all the social media stuff that you would need to promote this on all your socials.
Like, I think anything in life, it's passion and follow through.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and the facts are available to you. That's been done for you. So now we all provide the passion and the follow through. I just have to, you know, compliment you guys, because having been at this for too long, you guys approach this in a different way than some of the other advocacy efforts we've seen. You approach it in a much more, a broader way, and especially we're concerned about the artists, the independent freelance artists, and you know, who have so often been left out of this, and we're calling them rightfully so cultural workers, because there's still this misunderstanding that, yeah, if you be an artist, you're buying into a life of poverty and you're not really working, and we know that's not true, because you can't create that economic development it is the art that creates that economic development. So you know, I'm really thrilled about this, and I think, you know, we need to pull the silos together and make sure that we protect our most vulnerable, which are our independent artists and our freelancers. And so I wonder if you would talk a little bit about the next step in legislation that you have in mind.
So, you know, right now we are embracing any and all arts proposals that are out there. We are yes and Save Our Stages, Calmer, Place, Create, Hits. I'm sure I'm forgetting the Performer Tax Restart, the Performer Tax Parity Act, which definitely needs to get passed. There are lots of different proposals out there that address different things. We are working on a piece of legislation that is called Defend Arts Workers Now, DAWN. There is no economic recovery except by the light of dawn. And so what DAWN does is it marries relief and recovery in a landmark bill that addresses, that empowers the agencies that exist within our government, and points out that putting creative workers back to work is the way we will get through this recovery. It's jobs and infrastructure. So in short, what DAWN says is we want to authorize $43.85 billion to the NEA, NEH, IMLS, CPB, and SBA to give direct grants to the operators, employees, and artists, 1099 and mixed income earners, direct grants of live venues, recording venues, cultural spaces, and related businesses. We don't want a costume shop having to fight with Shake Shack for relief. And so that's the relief part of it. The recovery part of it is going back to this idea that anything that arts and culture touches, it makes better. Integrate arts and culture into agriculture and transportation and our cities and in rebuilding this nation. Now is the time for us to restore and resurrect the very spirit of our country. I mean, this election was about the soul of America. We are the soul of America. And so you can do two things at once. And so what Dawn does is look at a very granular grassroots approach to jobs and infrastructure and creating a relief and recovery plan that addresses all of that. We will build back better, if I can borrow that, Carson.
And well, I also want to say that while we're exploring these legislative options, and they're very important, we also now have an administration that's coming in that's probably a little bit more amenable than an administration that's leaving that tried to zero out funding for arts and culture institutions. So what we're seeing with the incoming Biden administration, something that's exciting, is there's already been an appetite by Biden and Harris to create executive level offices for priority items. So for instance, this John Kerry position on climate did not exist, and it is going to be willed into existence via executive action. So one of the things that it occurs to us that we think about a lot is, despite the fact that arts and culture is $265 billion bigger than transportation, there is a Secretary of Transportation. Despite the fact that we are like 5 times bigger than agriculture, there is a Secretary of Agriculture. So what we're trying to do is, and what Jenny's showing you here is, in so many of the countries across the world, there is an executive level minister, secretary, executive level office of somebody who overlooks this incredibly important socioeconomic sector of the economy. And so we are hopeful that we can begin to have very public conversations with the Biden administration about the idea of finally having an office, somebody who sits on the Domestic Policy Council, somebody who is literally in the room where it happens with a seat at the table, overlooking this $877 billion industry. Matthew?
Really quick to piggyback on that, there's this thing called CEDS, Community Economic Development Strategies. And again, this is going back to municipal and local. In a 50-state strategy, and however many counties there are in the United States, looking at how arts and culture can be integrated into local economies, and again, making this case, what can happen is, again, to what Jenny was saying, this bill came out of a Senate meeting. We were telling them the facts and saying what we needed, and they said, do you have any bill language? And so we wrote a bill summary, and then it became expanded, and we started talking to coalition partners across the country and every sector. What do you need? What didn't work in the last package? What do you need to see? Really boring stuff about NAICS codes and just these provisions about what needs to happen in order for us to legislatively change the relationship for arts and culture workers and arts and culture institutions. And so part of what happened is, in this, journey, we're learning, oh, we can do this, we can do this. So talking about any kind of policy, if you see something in your community that needs to be addressed, and it can be done legislatively, add arts and culture as a plank to your platform. Add arts and culture as a plank to your representative's platform. And pushing for it, again, is only going to grow more economy, and it's only going to grow more jobs and more spirit. Yeah.
Matthew and I spoke with a young man in Ohio who by himself got $200,000 in relief appropriation for Ohio arts and culture workers. By himself. He started showing up at legislative meetings. He called every single one of his state legislators, every single one of them. He was on just on the phone all day, every day, talking about Ohio arts workers. And, it's obviously in a state where it's hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars and tens of thousands of jobs. $200,000 isn't enough, but it's something because of something one person did.
And by himself. While we're talking about, I want to go back in a minute and show the toolkit, because I want people to know where it is and how to access it. But we're talking about a new administration, and Jill Biden is an educator. And, his speech that he gave in Wilmington, he said, this is a great day for American educators. And of course, a lot of our attitudes about arts and culture, are formed by the fact when you enter school, it's not a priority. And so, this is a long-term solution because it's going to take a long time. And when we think about arts education, we don't think about just people on the stage. We think about the people off the stage and the jobs that I do. And when we look at this inflection point that we're at, with Black Lives Matters, and we look at the inequities, if you look at the inequities of who gets an arts education and who doesn't, that's the start. That is an aspect of the problem. And so, and I think people generally think that we have more arts education resources than we do. And so it seems to me, as we look forward to a new administration, that arts education, being a right and not a privilege, is one of the cultural policy opportunities. I don't know what you think about that.
Just really quick, and I want to recognize that I've done a lot of talking, is when, to your point, two really quick things. I think it's 67 or 68% of young people who have arts and culture in their life end up becoming patrons of the arts as adults. That's also saying you're teaching people how to be consumers of arts and culture, which is perpetuating our institutions and the arts and culture economy. The other thing I'll say, Heather, and I'm so glad you brought this up, it's so important, we talk about it a lot, is how can we rethink education so that as a student, I'm not sitting in a math class learning trigonometry and geometry, but I'm learning it through a light plot and how it's cast. And this is how we can apply arts to education. I will never forget that a sine wave is how a sine wave, and well, now I am forgetting, but anyways, it's probably a bad example. Anyways, math is music. And, integrating the arts into subjects that we wouldn't normally think of, particularly in math and science, and of course, history and just the other emotional and social skills that we learn through that. I think that we can rethink education from the very beginning and how we can group these things together so it's not extra.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in addition to that, and I strongly encourage you all to check out Americans for the Arts. I put their link to their social impact wheel in the chat, but I'm going to share a little bit of it really quickly with you, just to put in perspective about so art for art's sake, arts education simply for the benefit of learning a skill is itself a value in and of itself, but something to keep in mind. You're 5 times less likely to drop out, students are, if they participate in the arts. They're 2 times as likely to graduate college. They test on average 100 points higher on the SATs, and they're 4 out of 5 are more likely to vote. These are just a handful of statistics about sort of the ancillary benefits of an arts education being brought into to early development, childhood development. They increase the child's development and performance in school on every perceivable metric. There's no downside to it. Carson?
Yeah, Heather, I really wanted to pivot on this idea of education, Biden, all this, and what you were talking about a while ago about the self-confidence issue, et cetera. So we live in a world where teachers aren't given enough money for school supplies, and they end up supplementing them themselves. Like the average average teacher goes to Walmart or Walgreens and brings a bunch of school supplies in to execute because they're under-resourced. I sat in on one of these Quarantunes, which is this big charity that's been started in Hollywood to help arts sector out. And Josh Groban has a charity that brings musical instruments and art supplies into schools all across the country. One of the things that we are working on right now with Be an Arts Hero is we're working on a campaign that's actually very interesting, because we're working with board members of non-profit institutions all across the country. And the idea is that board members are starting to come together and say together to the United States government, something is wrong about the equation of where 4.5% of our GDP gets its subsidy, capital, etc. It should not be up to teachers to supply their own classrooms, and it shouldn't just be corporate philanthropy and individual donors putting a floor underneath 4.5% of the economy. Like when agriculture needs help and sustenance, they don't get a grant from the Mellon Foundation. Right. You know what I mean? There's an understanding that it is the responsibility of the United States government to give agriculture the proper investment, support, and subsidy it needs to be the engine and food for the country that it is. Same thing with us. Like, as we're trying to change this conversation, like, teachers need school supplies, and an industry that adds $877 billion to GDP deserves a floor put underneath it, and the same kind of legislative priority, respect, support, and subsidy as any other important part of the economy.
Well, I think it's really important, and as Megan mentioned, cultural policy professor. So it's really important to understand that our cultural policy was based on a very hands-off tax deduction. And that's why, Matthew, what you said about education and young people becoming patrons of the arts is so important, because that's also where we get equity problems, right? Because we have the most developed, most generous philanthropy system in the world, and we have the least amount of government, support. So, and what's happening in the UK is they have subsidy, but now they're jealous of philanthropy and they're wanting to balance. So it's about balance, but philanthropy is like board members that's a great thing, because philanthropy is an interesting place that we have to help educate about the entire sector, so that we don't, because that's part of where we get, into the equity problems. But yeah, but the whole policy of the United States cultural policy was hands off. We'll give you a tax deduction and you'll take care of it, but that only goes so far. So we've got to look at it afresh and create a new balance. So let's go to the toolkit real quick, because I want to also take some questions, and I want to make sure people see the toolkit.
And this is, I just want everybody to know that we work very fast. So this is a toolkit that when we heard the news about the compromise bill, like Jenny and her graphics team, which right now is mostly Jenny, like spent the weekend creating this toolkit.
So this is generally, like, this is when we're talking about a toolkit, because I understand that that's not necessarily in everyone's vernacular. This is sort of what we're talking about. So this is a toolkit that you can, it's for social media, and it's for organizations and individuals, and has like a how to use, right? And it says, it gives you the hashtags that are off that we would like you to use. We ask you to tag your representatives, and we give you a link to what their social media handles would be. And we go into key messaging, so you understand why we're pushing for this right now, and what the stakes are. So you're not just, posting without an understanding of the issues. We're not asking you to just sort of click and mindlessly, post whatever we ask. This is so there is a portion of this that is educational. And then we have the linked assets, which are things that that the posts refer to. So it says, click this link. This is the link that they're asking you to click. And then we go into graphic series number 1, which is It's Time to Call Your Reps. And we have Instagram, it's a series, a 5-image series, and there's a post that's still, we have one that's animated, we have a full downloaded one that's just a single video instead of individual videos. And we have that in every format for Instagram story, Facebook, Twitter, etc. We have one that says tweet your reps, same deal. And we also give you little captions so you don't even have to think about what to say. If you want to use your own words, we strongly encourage you to do so. But if you are, we understand that advocacy is a full-time job for very few of us. For the rest of us, we have other obligations. We have family, friends, work, and we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to be civically engaged. Email your reps. And then we go into some of the more specific messaging. So tell your senators, no recess without relief. This is our time is running out graphic series that it just explains how much time we have left before Senate is in recess till the end of the year. And just to illustrate the stakes, because I don't think we've exactly explained it, I'm just gonna go really quickly to this because this is really important. December 11th, the House of Representatives recesses until after the new year. December 19th, Senate recesses until after the new year. All right, the day after Christmas, December 26th, 12 million Americans will lose their unemployment insurance. And December 31st, the moratorium of evictions is lifted. And that risks the eviction of up to 19 million Americans. So this is why the stakes are so high, folks. And this is why we're doing this right now and pushing so hard, because we're looking at the eviction of up to 19 million Americans and 12 million Americans losing their unemployment insurance. That something needs to happen now, and we can't wait until after the new year. We go into, so that's our time is running out graphic. And then we have one explaining SOS being on the docket and what it includes with the expanded version. So this is a version of the toolkit. You can go to our Instagram page and it's on our bio. We've also sent it out on our newsletter. We're going to have it linked on our website shortly. So it's available to anyone. That's one of the things that being an arts hero has always been about, which is we are interested in giving you the tools to advocate in your own language for yourself in the ways that you would like to. So we provide you the materials so that you can do your own advocacy your own way. We like to provide you as many social media graphics. We have a graphics yard with everything in it that we've ever posted. If you want to use any of our posts from anything, you can check out our Facebook or Instagram. It's all in our graphics yard. We're not proprietary. We want you to share it. We want you to use our resources so that you can be a better advocate for the arts and culture sector.
There have been a number of questions in the chat and about whether are templates, and this toolkit gives you a lot of templates.
Yep.
Right there. You can adapt them to your own needs. But the important thing is we need urgent support. And as Carson said, it's like we all get so tied up in doing our own work or our own things, and we think, is it really going to matter? Nobody's listening. Yes, they are listening. And there was a question that came through that I think is a very important question. I'll give you my take on it, and then I want to open. Is there any value in tagging members of the opposing party? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Both parties bipartisan. The economy is a bipartisan issue, which means the arts are a bipartisan issue.
Absolutely, Heather. And I just want to say that part of our long-term goal is to depoliticize the arts, is to say, look, and what's amazing about Save Our Stage is that was co-sponsored by John Cornyn of Texas and Amy Klobuchar. So that was a bipartisan bill, what's now a $20 billion dedicated arts bill brought to the floor by members of both parties. Matthew, I saw you there.
Yeah, it's just reiterating that the arts are nonpartisan, culture is nonpartisan, the emotional welfare of children is nonpartisan, the economy is nonpartisan, your livelihood is nonpartisan. So absolutely.
It's so important, Jenny, to depoliticize, because that is the lasting value of the culture wars. We need to shake that off if we can. Jenny.
And I just want to make sure, our organization is nonpartisan for a reason. I think when we first started this, I won't speak for other people, I'll just speak for myself, I had some pre-existing notions about what going into these Senate meetings, like these meetings with Senate staffers, which anyone can do, by the way. You don't need to be special to request a meeting with the Senate office. I thought when we had our first meeting with the Republican office, we were going to go into like the lion's den, but the reality is different. You know, like the staffers who take these meetings, this is their job. They are professionals and they are interested in bringing to their boss winning ideas and winning legislation. And their job is to represent their constituents. That's it. And I will just say that we've met with over half of the Senate offices at this point, dozens of House of Reps, and there has only been, I mean, we've had pleasant interactions, professional interactions with Democrats and Republicans alike. It only becomes partisan much later. You know, when the sausage gets made, everybody is looking for a solution to a problem. You just have to let them know that there is a problem.
There is, my time at NISCA, I spent time, you know, visiting legislators on both sides of the aisle, and I never ran into somebody that said, no, it's not important. I mean, look, when the rubber met the road and budgets happen, you know, priorities shift, but I never hit a roadblock like that in a no. And, you know, I've been in every county in New York State, and, you know, everybody wants arts and culture in their community because they want to make their community a great place to live, work, and raise a family. That's what I heard from every person, you know, every legislator is that they know that that's, you know, and what draws people downtown to Main Street. That's what the arts do. A question came in. Do you happen to know which, yeah, you just said the Congress people behind Save Our Stages.
Yep. Klobuchar and Cornyn co-authored it.
Co-authored it. And great. So there was a question about the difference between advocacy, which all of us can do, and lobbying, which is, you know, something only organizations with a certain designation can do. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and how they work together?
I mean, what's interesting, because we've done a lot of research into this, and the idea behind lobbying, lobbying is defined simply as advocating for a particular piece of legislation. So actually you, the advocate at home, are your own lobbyist, right? Now, there are people who have licenses that are professional lobbyists that do it 9 to 5 all day, every day. But they are basically just doing advocacy in a professional for hire kind of way. But the actual meat and potatoes of what it is very similar. Like if you do a bunch of research and you call your legislative office and you have a conversation with a legislator where you're advocating for a particular type of legislation in a textbook definition, you're lobbying. So I think it's a subtle distinction. Jenny?
Well, that said, the organizations, I think she was raising a very particular question about 501c4 status, right? And that differentiating between 501c3s, C4s, and 527s, right? So 527s are what you would call, what the designation is for a PAC, which is a political advocacy committee.
Political action committee.
Thank you. Tired, very tired. Yeah, so there are different organizational designations on a government level that are allowed to lobby. So we're in the process of becoming a 501c4, which is allowed to explicitly lobby with legislation, which is
and hire a lobbyist.
Yes,
and all of them.
We're allowed to put money into it, which is something that not all 501c3. You know, like
right.
There's laws governing how you can lobby and in what way you can lobby, and so 501c4s is is where we found ourselves fitting.
So 501c4, the wing is a 501c3, and all of the theaters that are probably tuned in here are 501c3s. So we can, so you can advocate. The line in terms of the difference of how it lands in terms of the language is thin. But that, I hope, answers our question from one of our viewers. And somebody asked the question, are the arts and culture industries going to be okay in a long-term sense? And, I'm going to choose hope. Because it is the arts and culture that is the backbone. It is the soul of the nation, and it's the economic backbone of the nation. And that, also what we've learned during this pandemic is that you can take away tools for us to create, and we're going to create anyways, because you can't kill it. You can't, because creators have to create. And as long as that energy exists, it's going to be a tough road. And it's very important. And one of the ways to ensure that we do is to take this toolkit and rock and roll and do your part and know that your voice matters, just like when you stood in line for however long to vote. It matters. That's my response. Who else has a response?
Go ahead.
I had a really immediate reaction. I think my question was, well, what do you mean by okay?
Yeah.
We are all Pollyanna. We are all Pollyannas in that we believe in the resiliency of the arts worker spirit, right? I truly believe in that. I think all of us who are probably on this call believe in that. But I got to get real. When Jenny's talking about the stats and how dire and how urgent, this situation is, and how urgent the need for relief is. I take a step back and I think, okay, if someone asks me, are we going to be okay? I say, well, if 90% of music venues are reporting that they may not survive the crisis, what does that mean for the music workers when it's time to come back to work? So my fear is that if we do not all advocate for and pressure Congress to give us the relief that we require in order to come out of this crisis and rebuild and sustain ourselves, if we don't receive that in subsequent waves of recovery and relief legislation, there will be no industry to come back to. It's about human infrastructure and it's about physical infrastructure, right?
Yep.
So for me, it's a larger question of, well, I don't know if we're going to be okay, because we got to make sure that there's jobs to return to, for one, that the physical infrastructure, the buildings, the institutions remain intact so the employers can keep employing their employees. But we also got to make sure that we save our people, because at this rate, it's a humanitarian crisis. And if people are losing their health insurance and they're getting sick and dying, they're getting evicted, they're subsequently becoming homeless, and it's disproportionately impacting Black and Hispanic communities who are already negatively impacted by the consequences of the virus itself, then there will be no human infrastructure after we come out of this crisis. So I have mixed feelings about it when someone asks a question like that, because I have hope that we're resilient, right? But I also think, we got to do a lot of work and raise our voices to make sure there's something intact.
Again, we have to add action to the hope, and that's why the Dawn Act is important. You're talking about the artists, and that's the part I worry. I mean, I worry about institutions for sure. But the institutions at least have some kind of infrastructure, and the artists are, the independent artists are left, which you mentioned health insurance, and we're not alone, the artists, cultural workers, artists are like more people than ever before because of the gig economy. And so we got to join with those forces and advocate for health insurance.
The answer to your question is only if we fight for it. That's the answer to that question. And when you're talking about 1099 and mixed income workers, when you're talking about artists, our cities are bleeding artists right now. They're hemorrhaging arts workers right now. They're leaving. There is a creative brain drain happening. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to fight for what we care about. And that is artists, arts workers, and the cultural institutions that ground our businesses. Because if we can't go back, if there is no institution to go back to work, there's going to be no work. You know, one of the things I wanted to add to that, and we're all hopeful, that's why we're fighting so hard. I mean, like, you know, we see the North Star and we are pushing every day, kicking down every door we can, saying, you have got to pay attention. $150 billion is estimated to be lost from April through July, Brookings Institution reports. Multiply that now to December. Multiply that through March. What is it? I don't even know how much. $150 billion in Broadway alone, 100,000 workers, 15 billion maybe. I'm forgetting. My brain also is a time fog. But,
you got it.
You know, that's banana town. That is cuckoo banana town. That is what's at stake. When you talk about health insurance, I'm about to lose my health insurance December 31st. I didn't make enough for Writers Guild. It should not be my union's job to provide me health insurance. It's a much larger issue. We need a 100% COBRA subsidy for 36 months. We need to fight for that when we talk to our legislators, an immediate retroactive extension of the federal pandemic unemployment compensation. That's that $600, and an expansion of PPP. Our government has the money. They need to act now. Yeah, we're going to create, no matter what, the human expression business, the First Amendment business, is that $77 billion. It's, Michael Seaman reports, 1.7 trillion in sales last year. Wow. Yes, we're going to keep creating. Economic justice has got to be a part of this conversation, because before this was happening, we were getting kicked out of cities. We were working 10, 12 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads, to do the thing we're passionate about. When we rebuild these institutions, economic justice has got to be a part of the DNA of what we come back to.
And that economic justice, you talked about getting kicked out of cities, and we didn't talk about this because a lot of people believe in bringing artists in to revitalize a place, but they don't make it. So artists are revitalizing and say, so this is they're doing the work, they're doing the labor, and then they're being kicked out. So that's part of the cultural policy that has to be there, is that, fine, we will come in and revitalize this neighborhood, but you've got to make a place for us, and you've got to compensate us. So those are the things, so that we're not just being used and tossed aside, I think is really, really important. So it's, yes, of course we're hopeful, but it is about fighting, and it's about unifying around this. And it's not the arts on ourselves. We're all interdependent within the arts and as a society, as you've said. And I know this to be true, and nobody's ever come up. There has been no economic recovery. There has been no urban revitalization that has ever happened without the arts and culture. Nobody has been able to prove me wrong. I'm now putting myself out there to give somebody a chance to prove me wrong.
And something to go on the heels of that, Heather, you know, if we're talking about the glimmer of hope and the dawn that's coming after the darkest time, Carson and his sister Bree and some friends noted this, that what came after the Spanish flu, right? And we think about, okay.
The flu of 1918.
Yes.
It actually came out of Kansas. Sorry,
Oh,
sorry, Spain. Sorry.
Oh my gosh. Well, the Roaring 20s, right? A creative boom. What
Yes.
came after the Black Plague, right? The Renaissance. So if history keeps repeating itself, and if there's something to that pattern, we are on the brink of a creative boom. And so we need the human and physical infrastructure to stay intact. And for that to happen, it needs relief and recovery, robust relief and recovery.
Yeah,
And-
that's what, go ahead.
No, and sustaining support, and flipping the narrative that we're not just asking for a bailout to go back before. We want to prosper, and prospering, you know, our country prospering is dependent upon the arts, economically and every other way. So we're not looking for a bailout, we're working, but we want to be sustained as critical and at the level in which we're contributing. And I think that's and so we start by getting self-esteem, and we become our own arts heroes, and then we bring others along with us. I'm sorry, Carson, were you going to say something?
I mean, probably nothing as good as that.
Well, it's really been a pleasure to be here with you. This happens kind of, you know, every once in a while we have these phone calls that are just like this. We just allowed the public in on our phone calls about strategizing ways to just keep pushing, keep it going. And, you know, the hope will come from everybody joining And this, again, this is not partisan. This is about, you know, our full recovery. And when somebody says, are you going to be okay? It's like, well, are you going to be okay? This is the great equalizer in a certain way, although not for some, but, you know, in that a lot of industries are in the same boat, and we're dependent upon this. And most of these industries don't contribute what we contribute to society and the economy. I can't thank you enough for being here. I am thrilled that you're doing what you're doing. As I've said to you from the beginning, the American Theater Wing is here to help you in any way. We're going to be upfront with you, and we're going to get this done. And to all of us all of you joining us tonight, I hope you took something away. Go to that toolkit, move those fingers, pour yourself a glass of wine. You can do it. They've made it so easy for you. So thank you for being here tonight. Let's be an arts hero. Let's save the arts. Thank you and good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
All.